what we call fact sheets that provide information on issues that have been coming up. There is the presentation that's behind you that tries to provide some detail about our research program and about what the Almond Board is. That's also in here. We also have information about the sustainability program that Kendall and Joe Brody will be talking about next. And then there's also some basic information, again, that the Almond Board puts together about the almonds. So, what are the almonds, grades and standards, crop protection. So it's just a lot of basic information in here about almonds that if you wanted to know something more, it's here. Food safety, we don't really talk that much about it from the grower, but food safety is an issue for almonds. You heard about the pasteurization rule. So there's a quick guide for food safety, GAPs for growers in here. And then what we call the Almanac, the Bible, that has, if you want any statistic on almonds, acreages, yields, where they're grown, something about the programs, that's in this little booklet that has a habit of falling out of the binder. But just to give you a sense of all the information in here, and I do expect you to read it tonight, or on your way home if you're not driving, or sleeping, right? So I just wanted to give a little bit more information about the Almond Board itself and some of the research programs. And so PowerPoint's the easiest way to do this. Just what is the Almond Board of California? You see us with our labels here. We're federal marketing order. That means growers got together and voted the federal marketing order into existence. It also means that we're under USDA's supervision. We're not government employees, but USDA does sign off on our budgets. And we can't lobby because we're close enough to the federal government. The money comes from growers. So for every pound that goes into the marketplace, 3 cents comes to the Almond Board. And of that money, where does it go? The majority goes to global market development and marketing of almonds. So, I mean, certainly in recent years, you've seen a lot more about the healthfulness of nuts. Those are the kinds of things that the marketing department works on getting out to consumers. But it's also about trying to figure out what is it going to take to expand the market in Russia, or now we're exploring Brazil, or China, India, all those kinds of markets. They're not necessarily traditionally know almonds. They need to be educated if they're going to start consuming almonds. So that's all under the marketing umbrella, and that's where the most of the money goes. The board also sets grade, quality, and food safety standards. That's something that's part of the marketing order. And then some of the money also goes to fund research, and I'll talk more about that, but there's basically 4 different research committees at the Almond Board. The granddaddy is the production research committee that Bob's the staff liaison to, but we also have a nutrition research committee, an almond quality and safety committee, and the environmental committee, which you have members here. And actually some of the members are on both the production and environmental committee. I think, Rob, don't you have 3 committees under your hat, wherever you are? He also has industry services, which is the communications to growers committee. And then also industry education, so just trying to get information out to growers, based on some of the research that's coming out or issues that are coming up. The other thing to realize is because this is a grower-enacted federal marketing order, at the end of the day, the decisions are made by the members of the industry. So it's the board and the committees that decide what to fund, where the money's going to go, and what we should emphasize. If you didn't know already, couple things that makes almonds pretty unique. First of all, only grown in the United States and California, only grown in the Central Valley. I'm not counting parts of San Luis Obispo County that are really more Central Valley-like than coastal-like. It's over 6,500 growers. The median size of a grower, actually 50% of the growers are 100 acres or less. Now, many of them, as you just heard, may actually be working with someone like Garrett or Gordon to manage their, or share crop or lease their lands. But just to understand that there's a sense of it all being big growers. It's actually a lot of small growers. 80% of the world's production comes here out of California. So chances are if you see an almond somewhere else in the world, it came from here. The last 2 years, the crops have been about 2 billion pounds. The acreage is still increasing. So last year, 790,000 bearing acres officially. The estimate that came out 3 weeks ago was 810 bearing acres for this year. And then the other claim of fame is that almonds are the top horticulture crop in export value. So, and the total value, farm value, is currently around $4 billion. So we're not peanuts in a number of different ways. This just gives you a sense of how the industry's been growing pretty consistently. And coming back to what you heard today, the growth isn't just in acreage, but the yields per acre have been going up based on some of these changes in the irrigation and the nutrient management and the pest management. So all of this research has been combined to help with the productivity side. Just some data, as I say, verifying, almonds top export crop from United States, and horticultural crop. I mean, I'm not counting the soybeans and the wheat and things like that. And then this gives you a sense of where almonds go. China, Hong Kong is now the single largest country. 2 years ago, it was still Spain. But the diversity you have here, you've got Europe, Asia, United Arab Emirates, Turkey, South Korea. And that's just the top 10 out of some 80, 90 countries almonds go to. So needless to say, understanding global trade trends is a big part of our job as well. I have included some information about the almond life cycle because it's sometimes hard to get a sense of that. I'm not going to go into it in detail, so I'm just going to flip through this, but it's in your binder. Planting an orchard, some of the considerations. These are some of the main varieties that you've heard about. They do look different and they are used differently in the marketplace. Okay, so some are really good for blanching, some are good for going into cereals. The nonpareil that you keep hearing about typically is the one that you see as a consumer, as a whole nut, because it looks really good, tastes good. So just to let you know that this is not all one lump sum from how the nuts get used perspective. In the winter time, what growers thinking about during the winter months, bloom, with pollination being the big nervousness, to be blunt, between this. Is it going to rain, too cold, and frost are the two big worries during bloom. Growing seasons, what we heard a lot about today, irrigation, nutrient, pest management. Harvesting, this is a shaker, this is a pickup machine. There's actually another machine in between, the sweeper, for just the basic, you heard that question got asked, how much is it currently equipment? Well, you've got 3 basic pieces of equipment for harvest: a shaker, a sweeper, a pickup machine, and that's not including getting the nuts from the orchard into a tractor trailer or something like that out of the orchard. And then you also have what we call the handlers, which are the first entity to process nuts, and you have hulling and shelling, sorting for size, quality, and they're the ones that then figure out where those nuts are going to go. As I say, part of what the Almond Board does is fund research, and this is the total research investment from almond growers. Basically, now 39 years, we're in the 40th year. And since production research is the first committee and the Grand A committee, if you look at it that way, it's still the largest chunk of funding, sum total over that time period. And I think I'm just going to list some of the challenges and drivers that the production and the environmental research committees are both thinking about as they're trying to figure out what research to fund. At the end of the day, if you don't have a profitable grower, you don't have an almond grower. Resource availability. I mean, this year is a dry year, water, but land, the ability to use the resources of California is a fundamental question that we have to deal with. Rapidly changing regulations. We just heard, plant bug is a sporadic pest. Food safety, changes in what markets want, sustainability, and this is something that not a lot of people have really talked about, but we've actually been very actively engaged, is we would not be here without that continuum of basic to applied research to the extension to the grower. And between budget cuts and changing priorities at universities, we're really worried about, even if we have money to spend on a researcher, will we have a researcher able to do the kind of work that we need? So we're actually looking at funding some humans, not just their activities, to make sure that we have the right research mix available to us to help address all of these myriad of questions that we're facing. This just gives you a sense of basic production costs. This is really just the field part. I think irrigation and fertilization, you heard, everything revolves around that, but that's also the largest single cost. It depends a lot of where you are. If you're in MID, your water may not be that expensive. If you're a little further west from here, it's a totally different story. And I think the other thing to note is that pollination services is the next largest cost. So we keep an eye out on that. Challenges, water availability. I always tell people you do not understand California until you start understanding water. And good luck. I think this is something we funded, a life cycle analysis looking at energy and greenhouse gas footprint. And I think that's just an eye-opener for us to look at where is energy going into the agronomic system, which is an input we really haven't thought that much about. So I've included it in here. The study actually found that if we use trees for the biomass of the trees for cogen or something like that, there's actually quite a bit of an offset. But again, irrigation and fertilization, there's a lot of energy that goes into that. What does that mean for the long-term sustainability? This is, for a number of you, what your bailiwicks are, all the environmental issues that are part of the regulatory world. We have the Endangered Species Act influencing a number of different regulatory processes, water quality issues, air quality issues, and the growers are all being asked to find out ways to how do they farm in ways that has less of an impact on the environment. So this gives you a sense of where money has gone from the Production Research Committee over the last 40 years. Just some current highlights. Breeding, having the different varieties, rootstocks. We heard a bit about that, soil pests are hard to manage, so to what extent can we use genetics to help us manage soil pest problems? Almond industry would not be where it is now without the improvements in irrigation and nutrient management that's been happening over the last 20 years. Pest management, continuing to try and figure out better ways to do it. IPM, as I mentioned earlier, how do we control aflatoxin in the field? And then honeybee health, and how do you make bees work within an almond system? That's been also long-term research priority for the Production Research Committee. You heard this, so I'm not going to go into it. But also just to give you a sense, I don't think a lot of people understand that after the federal government, the almond industry has been the next largest funder of honeybee research. And so this gives you a sense of the range of issues the almond industry has funded research on related to honeybee health. Pest management for honeybees, impact of the fungicides that we do use, because we have to use fungicides at bloom, and we need the bees. How to have better nutrition for honeybees, that's both actual nutrition in hives, but at the moment, one of the biggest issues is the fundamental changes in land use in the upper Midwest with the changes in corn prices. There's been over 9 million acres of essentially prairie lands lost in the last 5 years. And that's been over summering habitat for honeybees and pollinators in general. So this is a really complicated issue, just to be very... Environmental Committee, and the way I differentiate it from the Production Research Committee is we focus a bit more on how to produce almonds with less of an impact on the environment, or have projects that help develop data that tie directly into the regulatory process. The other thing that the Environmental Committee has been funding for some time is a tour like today to help educate. And the sustainability program, really, the sort of technical parts have all been coming out of, well, got initiated by the Environmental Committee and are still being run by the Environmental Committee. The more grower outreach and getting growers to participate is really done now by the Industry Services Committee that Kendall, where she is, will be talking about next. I give you a sense of the research projects we have right now, but really what I wanted to talk about is we have a number of projects going between both the Production Research and the Environmental Committee that are tackling some of these issues. So Franz talked a little bit about trying to improve spray, minimize essentially spray drift from the environmental perspective. From the production side, improve spray efficacy. Can we get a win-win? With current technologies, how do we do better? And then actually looking at modifying sprayers in ways to see if we can do better. That's a whole nother ball game, because that may also mean you need to change your orchard production system to accommodate the equipment. But air blast sprayers, a 60-year-old technology, and I think DPR would be very happy if we had something different, and the water quality folks too. So we're just trying to figure out how do we get to the next step and still maintain the ability to control pests. And then you also heard that many of the newer materials really you need to get full coverage for them to be effective. So we're really struggling with how to do that spraying better. You heard a lot about one new project that we're just starting this year directly gets at the nitrate issues. What I realized in talking with the regulatory processes is the Central Valley Regional Water Board people are engineers. They don't understand plants as in biological plants. When we talk about nitrogen use efficiency from a biological perspective, that doesn't mean anything. So how do we make that connection between what we know is going on at the tree or the surface level with what's going on below the root zone? And so this primarily CDFA FREP project is just getting started to start addressing some of those questions about which grower practices really do make a difference from a nitrate leaching potential perspective. So fumigants, again, that came up in the tour. Tremendous regulatory pressures from EPA and DPR. Just came out with new regs, proposed regs yesterday for chlorpicrin. So we've been trying between the Production Research and the Environmental Committee to understand better the biology of these systems. What can we understand about it? Are there better ways to assess if you really need to fumigate? If we fumigate, are there ways to minimize the off-gassing? So it's actually a pretty integrated process. And then there's still the whole rootstock effort to try and see if we can get genetic resistance. And then another area that's sort of a combination of different projects is really related to greenhouse gas carbon sequestration. So we've got nitrous oxide emissions, the life cycle analysis, where is carbon moving in the plant, modeling just basic photosynthesis. So again, trying to show that these are various projects that are individual in our funding, but are actually integrated to deal with some of these broader production and environmental issues. Prior to me joining the Almond Board, this is already now 9 years ago, the Environmental Committee started to struggle with the idea of sustainability and came up with a definition. Sustainable almond farming utilizes production practices that are economically viable and are based upon scientific research, common sense, and a respect for the environment, neighbors, and employees. The result is a plentiful, healthy, and safe food product. So once we had this definition, the question became, now what? And that landed in my lap when I joined the Almond Board. And the committee, and you'll hear a lot more about this next, has come up with a self-assessment based module program. There are some of the modules are out here on the table. And it's basically looking at asking growers, which of these practices are you using, are you not using? And at the end of the day, what the Almond Board's really looking at is how do we be a crop of choice for growers to grow, for Californians to let us use the resources to grow, and for consumers to want to eat. And how do we make sure that almond is the nut of choice when it comes to a consumer choosing or a cereal manufacturer choosing to include nuts in their product? So and realizing that what happens in the field directly impacts what's going on in the marketplace and vice versa, and trying to show that link. That's what this Mobius strip is about. And with that, I'll hand it over to Kendall and Joe. I just want to say two things as on the table. This is a summary of our research from 2011-12. It's also available on our website if you go in as a grower, but there are few of them out there, and in the back there's a CD with the full annual report. So if you really want to get into the research that we fund, this is the place to go. As I say, this is one of the modules from the sustainability program. Thank you.
Yeah, right behind you. That's good. Okay, ready? Okay, so what our mission here is to give you an update.
Look into there.
And Kendall and I are going to tag team on this. I'm going to be delivering the bulk of the presentation. Part of this, if you were here last year, is a bit of a repeat, but there are some new folks here. So we did feel like some of the basic elements of the program should be conveyed to them. So we'll start with that, and then we'll get into some results ultimately. Then we'll cover some of the participation results that have been impressive. And we'll end with this with a snapshot of some of the stats results on the assessment practices. What's going on out there for collector? I can. I'm so used to not using a mic. Okay. Anyhow, so here we go. Gabrielle showed this already. No need to recreate the wheel. A bit different definitions, a little bit of sustainability, different commodities. This one hits it right down the middle, though. All three E's, everybody thinks of sustainability, the three E's of economics, environment, and social equity. Well, they're all intertwined, aren't they, in that definition that the Almond Board has. So in reality, a key point here is when you think of sustainability and you think about intertwining these three E's, really, in essence, farming in the state of California and so many commodities, because in my job with Sure Harvest, I know what goes on in a lot of the other commodities, are really doing a good job. They're really doing a good job. They're integrating those three E's. They're adapting to change, new learnings, new technology. We heard some of the folks on the tour today talk about that. So why? Why do you need a sustainability program if things are going so well? And this is really the message that Kendall and I and others tell the practitioners, the growers as one of them, is really you got to be out there and champion yourself these days. You can't stay huddled up in a corner. You need to alert various stakeholders to the things you're doing, and that includes maybe a few of your trouble areas, but you're aiming to improve, but certainly highlighting some of the key things you're doing. And let me tell you, I've looked at the data. We're moving forward with a more robust database. There's a lot of good things to tell in this industry. Telling your story, being transparent. We all know, don't we? The supply chain questions continue to come. The Walmarts, the others. We get questions all the day from various businesses. How can we help address these scorecards, these challenges? Well, these kinds of programs can. To you all, there's a number of regulator agencies represented today. It's really important, isn't it? You're here today, you saw what goes on live out in the field, you're getting a really accurate understanding of what happens on the ground. In the self-assessment processes and other elements of this program, one key thing is just to capture reality and make it transparent. And that includes to public policymakers as well. Okay, so that's kind of the greater use of the program for the greater industry. When it comes down to the personal grower, the individual, what do they get out of it in some ways? Going through these processes we're going to talk more about really enables them to step back and take a comprehensive look at their system. We're going to talk about things you're going to see. You saw Gabrielle list those 5 different modules. They're growing. There's going to be more. But it really is a chance to systematically look at your system, think about perhaps maybe there's some efficiencies to be gained, maybe things you haven't thought of in a while, maybe some new learnings. Increased efficiency often goes hand in hand. I got profits up there highlighted, but enviro benefits and social benefits actually often coincide. Gabrielle showed the modules. Here they are again. Do note at the bottom, we are progressing rapidly on new additions. You got the irrigation, nutrient, air, energy, pest of the past, current. Financial ecosystem, water quality elements being added very rapidly. quick look here, just so those who don't know what this self-assessment entails. There are two types of questions. We call them metrics questions and then practice-based questions. The metrics would be at the top here, things like how many pounds of nitrogen used, what's your acre inches of water per year, etc. The more standard question is on around certain practices that it might be hard for you to see, but it's at the bottom. But when you have a certain practice, the question is, are you using it currently? Is it my current practice? Then there are these variants on no answers. I'm not familiar with it, never heard of it. I'm familiar, but I've never tried it. I have tried it, but no longer use it. The rationale is that the quantification of those categories can be very instructive and is being instructive in guiding educational needs, perhaps guiding research as the Almond Board moves forward. So these are all very valuable categories, very valuable to quantify. Historically, and still to this day to some extent, and Kendall's led the charge very well here, the self-assessment components of the program typically had been done, sit-down events. People come in, they have a little food, they do the assessment, just a few shots, but now, and more every day, is this online system. So we have this online system where all the modules, their content, the ability to self-assess, the ability for users to generate comparative reporting online. As we move forward, there'll be complementary educational content and context, we call it. All of this is this new online one-stop shop world, which is where the Almond Board's at and continuing to evolve. Just quickly, if you're an individual grower, you get back a report. You get back a snapshot after you do an assessment. The practices are on the rows, and then there are two columns to the right. One is your selection. So at that point, it designates, it shows, if it says yes, that's your current practice. If your answer was no, it would be blank. You can see this individual happens to be an overachiever. Not too many no's, not too many blanks. But the point is, it enables them to quickly do a contrast between where they are and where the collective almond growers across the state, what they are doing. So quickly you can say, hey, if I'm not doing it, but 90% of the growers are, maybe I should consider it. The growers appreciate having that kind of a look. This schematic really, in my estimation, and Gabrielle showed it a minute ago, really captures the essence of sustainability, and particularly these commodity-driven programs like almonds. We talked about the self-assessment. We talked about the modules, showed you how to do that. Think about this as this goes around in an iterative process, a circle. They get back a report. They can look at where they are. We, the Almond Board, collectively see where the state performance is, enables us to perhaps see where some opportunities are for improvement, devote education there, very useful. So interpret and compare individually, statewide. More and more, we're looking at data results and matching education need to that. What I mean by that is, and I'll show you in a second, we've seen some areas where perhaps there could be more sharing on irrigation management, decision making. We deliver that. We can do that through data. We can drive education through data. Same with pest management, some elements. Increasingly over time, we anticipate working with the board to do more of this applied education to assessment results. Keep going around the circle. They do the interpretation. Perhaps folks get some education. They think about things. They talk to their peers. They may implement something different through a planning exercise. Change, come back to the table, do it again. So it's this iterative process of capturing what you're doing, documenting it, perhaps seeking ways to do something a little different. They have always in this industry improved. This in many ways isn't really different, but it sure systematizes it. Kendall. There she is.
Hi, I introduced myself earlier, but I'm Kendall Barton with the Almond Board, and my role there is Industry Relations Coordinator. So I always say I have the fun job because I get to be out with growers and industry members most of the time. So I'm very lucky in that regard. The way it fits in with the California Almond Sustainability Program is that I get to help out with the workshops. So today, if you didn't know already, you learned almond growers are very busy people. And so sometimes it's difficult when you have a 24/7 job to get them off the ranch and into a building where I can sit them down and have them fill out assessments on these 5 different modules. But that's the role that I'm tasked with. And the way that we do this is a couple of different ways. We'll either have an almond board hosted event where it's just the almond board inviting growers, or we'll have events with allied industry members like handlers, huller shellers, nurseries, equipment dealers who have personal day-to-day relationships with growers that we can use to get growers to come out and visit us. Tony here at Salida Hulling was kind enough to let us do a workshop here a couple of months ago, and it was really great. But we really like to use those personal relationships and that trust that growers have with allied industry members to get growers to come out. Sometimes we have speakers. Franz was talking about Ken Giles earlier today, and he's been a speaker at one of our workshops. They talk about sprayer calibration, sweeper calibration, weed monitoring, anything that's really going to be useful to the growers that can help them become more efficient, maybe lower costs some ways. So something that's really going to be educational for the growers. We sit them down, we take them through at least 2 of those 5 different modules. We feed them lunch, and we send them back to the ranch. So that's really my role in the California Almond Sustainability Program. And I just want to go over with you guys a few statistics of participation that we've had since we really started with grower involvement back in 2009. So here's participation to date. We've had 997 participants. So close to 1,000 people have come to a workshop, sat and listened to a speech by me about what the California Almond Sustainability Program is. So they've sat through my spiel. They know what it is, they know the value, they know what we're trying to achieve with the program that Joe touched on earlier. Now, not all of these participants are growers. Sometimes we get PCAs, sometimes we get spouses that come, but typically it's mostly growers that attend these workshops. So that being said, there are 6,000 almond growers in the state of California. So close to 17% of California almond growers have attended a workshop just to learn about the program and what we're trying to accomplish with it. 473 different farming organizations have filled out a module and completed an assessment. And that can be one module, it could be all 5 modules. It could be on one single orchard, it could be on 5 different orchards. It could be for 1 year, it could be multiple years. So 473 organizations have done at least one module on at least one orchard in at least 1 year. A lot of them have done much more than that. Of those organizations represent almost 280,000 acres in the state of California. So that's the acreage that those organizations are responsible for as a whole. But as I said before, they don't assess all of their acreage. You choose one block or orchard to assess at a time with our system, and you go from there. So a lot of these growers do one orchard at a time and slowly work up to more. But 280,000 acres is what they're responsible for. In relation, there are 810,000 acres of almonds in California. So about 35% of the total California almond acreage is being represented and managed by these 400 and some odd organizations that are coming to our workshops and filling out assessments. Almost 1,700 separate modules have been completed, so each of those 5. And over 81,000 acres have been assessed. So that's 10% of California's total almond acreage has been assessed through this California Almond Sustainability Program. Gordon and Garrett have both been participants in the program before, our hosts from today. And so we're really trying to get growers to come out, tell their story by answering these questions. It's a growing practice. You either do it or you don't, and if you don't, we want to know why. And that's really the system. It's how we try to get growers to come out. Once they come out, they realize that it's simple, it's thought-provoking, it's really easy to do, and harmless. So once they're able to make it to a workshop and take time to leave the ranch for a little while, they come out, fill out an assessment. See, it's pretty easy. pretty painless, and really start to get value in the program. So we're trying to get some word of mouth that way with growers who have already participated to really lead the way for more growers to come. Joe?
See how happy she makes it? How can you turn that down? You see why everybody participates? It's way too much fun not to. All right, let's look at, here's where we're at. Let me be careful to say this properly. What this is a summation. And you're only going to get a snapshot, only a few extracts. I don't want you to think you're seeing the world here. But it's a summation of some select data to show you how the system works through the end of last harvest season. So Kendall's working great to get more assessment data in the system. We will be further integrating all that and doing some revised stats of about what you're about to see. So what I'm going to show you today, and it's interesting because this coincides, doesn't it, with much of what we targeted in the field today with our speakers. We talked about irrigation, we talked about nutrient, we talked about pest. Hard to see, hard to see. Can you see some of that? Here's the point. You've got all the data in your binder. The data I'm talking about today are pulled from the posters that were presented at the ABC conference in December. So you've got it all there. So just if you hear a few of my high points, you get a feel for the program, you see where it's going, you're just fine. Irrigation management. So first, let me say to you, this is really good the way the Almond Board's done this. They're actually applying variance, understanding of variability to it. So what we've got here are some of the practices here, the response here, the yes we talked about earlier, and then a combination of the no's. Remember I said there were different variants on the no? This is the cumulative no. And then to the right, we break out the variance of the no. Now, there's no test on this, nothing. I just want to make a couple of themes strike home here. Percent of orchards with the response, with a 95% confidence interval next to it. So we did do enough that we know that the data we want to talk about is going to have a confidence level of 10 or less. So the Almond Board at this point is fairly confident, talking to stakeholders about data where you see the percent and then you see the plus or minus associated with it is less than 10. So that's all that's on this screen are some select data with it less than 10. All right, what I'm going to do here is, in my estimation, this is my estimation, we are going to do a formal report here before too long at the end of this year, but it's where I see, we see some select areas of striking, really exceptional performance, and then perhaps some areas where we can consider improvement. I say that very carefully, the last part, because I've struggled going through this data at many times, finding areas for improvement. I'm not just saying that, but well-performing industry. Drips, micro sprinkler, what's the use, percent orchards around the state? 2/3. Now the argument, you heard all the different systems today, but I think there is a case to be made that you can relate micro drip systems to less water use, and perhaps that's a good thing in many ways. So I just want to make sure you all see that. Flow meters. Another positive here, flow meters. I'm telling you what, I've looked at a lot of commodities, a lot of industries. A 70% use rate on flow meters is fairly impressive. Pressure gauges installed. Pressure gauges installed, 93%. All good highlight performance numbers. Pressure drops are checked. Pressure drops are checked per irrigation run and filters clean, 92%. Okay, brilliant. Let's talk about some potential areas for improvement though. Despite having the infrastructure in place, it could be argued, since 57.3% are not doing a distribution uniformity test every year, the argument is, well, can we improve there? We can take a look at that and try to improve. It's probably very important and rather intuitive, isn't it? That you can have all the infrastructure in place, but if the end result isn't where you want it, you should be doing a distribution uniformity test. You got the flow meters? Are the flow meters being used? We could up the ante on both inspection and calibration of flow meters and actually using them and recording the numbers in a measure to manage kind of philosophy. I'm not going to go through all the numbers there, but the point is there's some areas for improvement. One thing to note here is you look at the kinds of no's. What I found and what we're finding is there's a high frequency when you do have no's that they fall into the not familiar or not tried category. So you're not familiar with it, or you're familiar, not tried. And that's really when we talked earlier about targeted ed and applying those statewide results to where education perhaps could be offered. You start thinking, okay, maybe a bit more outreach, some more education to ensure folks understand the benefits, or maybe it's just not working. Maybe there's a real rational reason why adoption rates aren't so low. Again, Gabrielle and I and others, the intent is to explore these nuances and to apply them as best as possible. All right, let's get moving. Around irrigation scheduling. Around irrigation scheduling, there's likely some areas for improvement. Again, improvement is all relative. What I mean by that is there's still got 40-ish% are integrating soil water holding capacity, depletion rates, management depletion rates, understand that. Evapotranspiration, we talked about today. Again, it's all relative. 40% are doing it, but when it gets over 50-ish% on the no uses, we're going to take a look at that. Nutrient, another topic we hit today. Fertilizer rates, really good. This is real good on the nitrogen management front. Fertilizer rates are based on yield estimates and amounts removed by fruiting structures. You heard that today. You heard the spokesperson saying they were doing that. Very important to know what your targets are on nitrogen and not overuse. Very good. Plant tissue sampling, we heard that today. 90%. So 90% of the orchards in the sample set, the practitioners are doing these annual leaf sampling. And of that, 88% are doing the leaf sampling according to established sampling procedures, the kind of thing that Sebastian talked about, a real good adoption rate of those kinds of methodologies. 74% use fertigation. We heard about the efficiencies of delivery. 94% are timing nutrient apps to crop demand, the proper phenological stage. And nitrogen applied 3 or more times a year. I'm impressed by this, over 70%. So this is a lot of data. You see, the point, yeah, you get the theme here. So where can some improvements be done, perhaps? Calculating other sources, so non-fertilizer sources of nitrogen in budgets. That could perhaps pick up a bit. Compost, manure, nitrogen cover crops. Well water. The nitrate content in well water is a big deal. We do think that that should be analyzed more frequently and integrated into the nitrogen budget. Again, everything's relative, but the improvement could pick up. Pest management, last but not least. This one was particularly hard to find areas of potential improvement. That's a reflection of all the great almond board research over the years, high levels of performance, 92% actually formally scout fields. Not bad, not bad. So both PCA and in-house and other people who aren't PCAs, but 92%, those are good numbers. And 86% integrate that monitoring with university guidelines and experience on their pest management strategy and tactics. We heard about the navel orangeworm today. Very fantastic data around navel orangeworm. 86% are doing the mummy type extractions, ensuring the minimal numbers are left in tree. We talked about that as a means to control navel orangeworm. When they do hull split sprays, they're based on degree days. Egg trap counts. 80% of those hull sprays that do happen aren't just done randomly, they are done via scientifically appropriate ways. Over a 5-year period, 40% of the sampled orchards over a 5-year period use no dormant sprays. Nice statement. In terms of pesticide risk, 94% adjust sprays based on average tree size and shape. Air blast spraying is stopped when making road turns, 98%. Spraying near waterways, other sensitive sites discontinued when winds blowing in that direction, 93%. Good stuff. Where for potential areas of improvement? On the weed front, the weed monitoring could pick up, especially in regards to including growth stages in the weed monitoring and integrating potential resistance issues. Again, everything's relative, perhaps some area improvement there. We've already started some targeted ed. Right, water-sensitive paper. Kendall talked about ensuring, and so did the practitioners, having some speakers talk about on-target deposition, et cetera, and we have already started that, and we could pick up that performance just a bit as an industry. Okay, that's that. So you can see how it's a big data set. You just saw some bits and pieces. Again, as the year comes to a close, we will be using this more, and you'll see much more of this. Incentives, the incentives game. You've heard of myself, you've heard of Kendall, you've heard Gabrielle talking about the benefits of the program, but it always comes back to the question, what's in it for me? How can that increase? So additional incentives, we gave a little bit of an update last year. Here is this year's status. We do have online continuing education, which is brilliant. The discounts on insurance premiums, bank loan rates, is really dealing with those industries and ensuring they see that this is a risk mitigation approach. We're making progress there with both of those. And Sebastian, he talked today in the field about the nitrogen management efforts, the modeling. We are working with Patrick Brown, Sebastian, and others to integrate that modeling, put it into the online system, use the mathematics, supply some mathematics for budgets, some advice on future applications of fertilizer, and also potentially farm quality evaluations associated with the Irrigated Lands Program. So again, this is a great program. They're greater collective good, individual good, always looking for other opportunities. And I always end with this, challenge you all are out there. Any other ideas, particularly the regulatory agencies, on how we can apply this program for extra incentives? Okay, thank you. Questions?
Well, just a few things. I wanted to acknowledge, I don't know if they're still here, Frank Damrell from Senator Kathleen Galgani's office was here. I think "was" is the right term. And Ann Magaro, who's the consultant to the California Senate Agriculture Committee, is here, and appreciate both of you taking the time to learn something about almonds, since you have to make decisions, or advise, I should say. And I don't know if Brian, did you want to say a few words? Okay. This is
very few.
Brian Lay, the head of California Department of Pesticide Regulations.
Yeah, it's hard to say. I don't need that. Okay, first off, I wanted to thank you all for opening up your place to us, your farms. Can I have all the DPR staff stand up just for a minute? So okay, all right, so you see we got a number of folks here. You can sit down. So when we were driving up, I got to know some of the staff a little better, and they were excited. They were excited to get out of the office, of course, but they were really excited to see an almond operation. One of the guys I was talking to, he used to manage, I think it was 4,000 hectares of a tea plantation, 1,200 people. I don't think he'd ever been on an almond ranch before. Another guy had just finished up, he'd been working in South Africa and doing research with wheat and stuff, and he's going to manage one of our grants that were given to you all to look at some of your issues. And he was really excited. We're lucky here in California. We have, it's simply the best pesticide regulatory body in the world. And we try to make it science-based, and we try to make it thoughtful. And it's important. I know you guys, when you're not being regulated, you're being protected. Half of our mill assessment comes from non-ag. So, we're looking at everything from protecting your pets, protecting yourself when you're in the grocery store. If it wasn't for a vigorous program like this, we would have a little less happy life. So it's important. But I want to leave you with a couple things. One, Gabrielle mentioned that we're going to look at chloropicrin. So it's very important. This is an open comment period. It's going to be for a while. It's a very important tool in your work life. So look at these mitigation proposals, make sure that they're grounded in your world and give us good comments. It's real important. You guys, more than anyone else, you understand what's going on with bees. I think it's really important that you come to the forefront and explain to my other 37.9 million Californians how important bees are, but also how it has to be a rational approach. You know, there's a huge call to just simply identify one, class of chemistry as the devil and get rid of it. So you have to really be vocal on, we need a balanced approach. There's a lot of issues going on. So it's real important that you step up and remind folks that the tools that you use are really what makes modern society possible, and that you use them well, keep them safe, and you guys I've seen almond, improvements in the last 30 odd years, and it's incredible, and you do everything that a regulator would ever hope to happen. You move, you make advancements, you do the research to get to a better place, and you're the easiest side of my job. It's my other folks that are not really grounded, that want, magical thinking to occur. So it's important to step up. Marketing is real important in what you do. Not only the food you produce, but the ability to do it in a climate like California means that you have to really explain who you are, what you do, why it's important, and that you're very cautious as you use things. So with that, thank you very much. Like I said, our staff, it's important for us to get out. So we appreciate these a lot.
Thank you, Brian. I just want to again thank everybody for coming. I want to thank Heidi and Debbie for making sure that we had food and all this organization, and that the flowers were color coordinated with the hulling shelling equipment. Just as a side note, we are actually in a huller sheller operation. If this were harvest season or thereafter, you would not want to be eating here. A, it's dusty. B, you couldn't hear yourself. For those that are interested, Tony Plaza's here. He's willing to show either parts of this operation, but as I say, they've also put in a whole solar facility. That's interesting to see how that's being used to help them offset some of their energy costs. So for those that are interested, Tony will give them a tour after this. But any other questions, comments? Thank yous, I should have said. And again, thanks again to Garrett and to Gordon and to Tony for being willing to let us bring everybody to your operations and talk about your operations. So thank you.